client. And just a small note, I switched to normal CSS because Sass doesn't really work on Linux. There's a problem with Node Sass being able to compile or whatever. I think I need Python too, but it's not a big enough deal for me to fix. So before anything happens, we're going to open up both index and app and basically just rip out everything. So what we're left with in app is just rendering the component. And for now, index is just going to say index works. And the first thing that we're going to do is just make another directory for all of our components. And we're going to start with working with the layout. So I'm going to add an index.ts here to export everything from this module, which I think I have to do this so you can see it. And I suppose I should probably show that you can generate a React component using the NX console. We'll just have to type in next component, and we can say layouts inside of the client project, where we can also skip the test and run this. I guess we also have to click CSS. I'm not sure why that's not chosen here with this, but that's okay. And now we have these two files. Before we go in there, I'm just gonna export everything from /layouts, and this is the generated layout component. And I might not use the NX console for all of these, just because I'm not like a huge fan of how this is set up. For instance, I would probably rather destructure this and only have interface for props when I need it. And you no longer need to import React because this is a NextJS project, so that's unnecessary. But it's good that we have the schematic. Now I'm just going to change this to the format that I do like. So the first thing I want to do is import the head from NextHead. And this will allow us to give the title to our page, which we can add to our props. The title is going to be a string, and we can destructure that here. We can also destructure children because this is a React component. And I'm going to change this div to a main. So this title property is going to generate the tab or the page title, so you can see it inside of the tab of the browser. And then our main content is going to be inside of this main HTML tag. That's why it's using the children prop. Next, let's create a header. And this is kind of just for decoration, but it's going to be the top of our page where we could add some styling and CSS. Speaking of which, let's import our CSS up top, and we'll write in a little bit. Now for the header, I want to get the curve SVG and also the NX logo SVG. And we open up an SVG, you'll see that it's using XML, which can also be read as HTML. And TypeScript makes it easy for us by changing all of that into a React component for us. But we're going to have to alias it so that there's no naming conflicts since we're using two React components, or SVG React components here. And we'll add it to the header like this. And then we'll also add class names here so we can style this so it's a little bit more predictable when it's rendered onto the page. And a note, we're using CSS modules here, which is kind of preloaded with NextJS, but it allows us to reference CSS by properties like this, and then it'll be dynamically generated with a hash onto the client side. But in layouts, we're just going to add it right here before the main. And then we also need to go into our CSS file, the layout.module CSS, and define those styles. So header is going to be a width of 100 and just a relative position so that we can position the SVGs on top of it. Here are the classes for curve and logo. As mentioned, we need the absolute positioning so that we can position it on top of our header. And then with SVGs, you need to define the height and width, or height or width. And then with the logo, we're doing the position of 50% and then transform translate of -50%. And that's just a little trick of centering it horizontally. And I think that's good enough for now. So let's try it out in our index file. We just need to import layouts and then wrap this in layout. And then remember, this needs a page title, which we're just going to give it as homepage. So let's try this out. And this will be an NX serve client. I'm in the wrong directory. Yeah, this will be an NX serve client. And let's see our header. So that looks kind of right. Oh wait, I forgot to do the reset. But we also have the page title of saying homepage, so that's good. And index works, so we're on the right track. We just need to add some global CSS, which we can do right now. So the global CSS is this styles.css file. All right, well, I'm gonna rip all of this out because I don't want it. Okay, so we're starting with the normal reset that Create React App gives us. That's giving everything box sizing, body of 100%, and then the body of 0 margin and padding, and also some sensible fonts. It also looks like we're using CSS variables for colors, and I guess I'll add that. So these are the colors I've defined for our CSS variables. We have a primary, secondary, both of which are bluish. We have a purple accent, a white background with some gray also that we can use later, and then text as a very dark blue, and then text secondary for placeholders and stuff as a gray. And I don't really want to spell out the hex colors or hex values since, I mean, they're right here. And then next on our reset is all of the headings. So H1 through 6, we're making sure that all of the margins are 0 with a respectable font weight of 600. And then I defined each font size for all the other headings here. So starting with 48 pixels, going down to 16. This is missing pixels. And H5 is also has a letter spacing and transform uppercase. I forget why, but and then finally, I'm gonna add a minimum height of 100 view height for our main. And that should do it for our reset. Let's add the color to our little header. So that will be layout.module.css. And we just need to change the fill here to primary. And now we get this nice little blue on our NX logo. Okay, I'm gonna stop the server because now we can go to the fun part. And that is to open up app.tsx. Oh, we need to install the stuff. Okay, let's go into the Apollo docs. And I think all we need is these two. So let's do a yarn add Apollo client and GraphQL. Great, now we can go into app. And we're going to grab Apollo provider so we can grab the component here. And then Apollo provider needs a client. So we need to create that client. And that'll be a new Apollo client. The URI is going to be the link to our backend server. So it'll be localhost 3333/GraphQL. And we're also going to be using the in-memory cache. And with that client, we can add it here. And that's all we need to set up Apollo. But now we can go into our index.ts and fetch some data, which I forgot we need to generate our hooks. So we're going to go back into our library and generate a new file for our operations called launch.graphql. And here we're going to define all the queries that we need related to launches. Those two are going to be get launches and get launch. Both of these are going to return the same-ish thing. So I'm going to make a fragment to make our lives a little easier to return this portion of a launch so we can use the launch results in both of the queries. All right, this one actually looks like this. Now, if you remember back to our API, we're missing mission here, and that's because mission also takes in a input. So to make it dynamic, we're going to take it in as the root query here. So we have access to it inside of our React application as well. And lastly, we just need to fill this in. So this needs the cursor, and then we need to fill in mission patch, providing the size variable. We're going to do the same thing for get launch, except this one requires an ID, so we need to also provide that as well. And now we need to run the generate command, so that'll be nx run graphql :generate, and everything should say success, so like started, completed, so that's good. And then in our index file, we should now have access to the use get launches query, which we can use as a hook. And let's provide the variables of patch size large, and this should give us data and loading. And for now, let's just console log the data so we can see it. And we need to serve both the server as well as the client so that it can communicate with each other. But once both of the servers are up, let's go into our homepage, open up the console, and we should get launches. It's undefined at first because nothing's there. But once it is loaded and queried, we should have all the launches. We do, which is quite a bit of data. So now we need to render this onto the page. So let's make another module inside of components called launch. And I'm going to fill this in with a couple files. So index, launch.css, and launchcard.tsx. So index is just going to export everything from launchcard. And launchcard, we'll start with this. We have the interface for props and the component itself. So first, I'm going to import the launch type from the automatically generated GraphQL types for React, because the props is just going to be everything from launch. And I'll leave this here in case we add other props. I believe this is all we need at the moment. And I'm going to destructure ID, mission, and rocket here, because this is just going to be the card, so we don't have all the information, just the sample of it. And we'll start with just two headers for the name of both the mission and the rocket. And then index, we can go ahead and use this. This is the wrong file. Index.tsx, I meant. And then instead of index works, we can replace this with the map over the array of launches. And inside of props, we're just going to spread out all of the properties of the current launch. Now this can fail because this is kind of falsy. So first we'll check to make sure that launches actually exist. And we also make use of that loading property. So with this, we can save. And now we have all these, which is a start. So we can now style the launch card itself. So first I'm going to change this to an anchor tag instead of a div. Because later I want it so that when you click on the card, you go into a details page. But we're not quite there yet, so we just need to add some styling. So the name, I'm going to give it a class name of card, which we need to define later. And we'll come back to this, but we do need to add in a background image. But let's go ahead and define that card style. And the card itself is going to have some padding. We're going to round out the corners with a border radius. The background image is going to be covering the entire card, which means that we need to make the color white so we can actually see the text. And the containing anchor tag, we're going to give it a display block and text decoration none. But the height and margin is mostly just to contain the image, which we need to add. Background image here is going to be a URL going to the specific image of right now moon. Nice. We actually want this to be dynamic based on the ID, and that's just to spice it up a little bit. So I've created these two. We have a constant to all the possible images, and then we have a function that takes an ID and gives us an image based on the ID of that image. So we can just call get bg image and pass in the ID. And now our list of launches have different images. That looks good. Let's actually, we could probably make the main container a little smaller, but this is fine for now. And then back in the launch card, I don't think I've actually explained how this works because it's not every day you actually get to use the mod function. But we know that the ID is a string form of a number, so we can take a remainder of the length of images, so it'll always cycle through, so it'll always be 0, 1, or 2, which means it's going to be one of these three images. Now to update the layout, let's open this up, and I just want to add another CSS class called container, and for that we need to import all of the CSS from the layout module and add a container class down here. And I just want to add padding to it. And let's see how's that. That looks better. Actually, let's make it have a max width of 1000 pixels. And then we're going to use margin 0 auto to center it. So that when we have it full screen, it'll just be all in the center like this, instead of spanning way too far beyond being aesthetically pleasing. Alright, so back to launch card. The next step is to make a launch details page. And for that, we're going to need to use a link first and wrap our card in it. This way we can link to the actual page for just the individual launch. And the link takes an href where we can supply a template string to a dynamically generated page based on the ID. And to make this page in NextJS, since there's a file system router, we need to make a new directory for the launch sub path route thing. And then we need to use angle brackets for the dynamically generated query param or path parameter. And this is just going to be the ID. And we can add the boilerplate of the layout, and this title is just going to be launch details. And for this to work inside of NextJS, we also have to do an export defaults, which I don't like, but it is what it is. Now to get the ID param, we could actually use a React hook here called useRouter. And this will give us access to everything inside of the route history as well as the URL. Now we only want the ID, so we can destructure that from router.query. And before creating a component, let's just render out the ID so that we know that it's working correctly by the linking. So back in the browser, let's just click on a random thing. And here is our ID, which should match our route. We can also try a different one, like the very first one. And there's one. So next, let's make that launch details component, and we can just add it to the launch module. So this will be launch details.tsx. All right, let's first make our boilerplates. So we have the launch detail props and then a div at the end. Now this is gonna follow the same pattern as our launch card, where we get the typing of launch and extend our props to match it so that we can have access to the ID, rocket, and site here. And then inside the launch details itself, we add the headings of the rocket name and the site. And for styling, I'm going to reuse the card styles, which means I will also need to reuse the background image, which we can grab from this same module here. Now this is a little bit bad practice. I'll probably move this out to its own utility directory or library later, but this is okay for now. Now let's also make sure that we go into index and export everything from launch details and use it inside of id.tsx. And here we actually need to make another query so we can have access to all that information on this page. That's going to be very important when we load the page on this specific route first before we load the home page, so this needs to be loaded in. This is the wrong hook. We want the lazy query. And the reason why we want the lazy query here is because we don't want this query to run right away. We want to wait until we have the ID from the router, so then we can call the query once we have the ID, like this. Now there's a problem with this, with how it's being rendered. We need to add this inside of a use effect hook, so it runs every time the ID changes. And for that to happen, we also need to make sure that the ID exists and it's not falsy in any way. Then with all of that, we can get rid of the ID here, check that it's not loading and that data has been queried, and pass all the properties into the launch details component. Okay, I think that's good. Let's check it out. So now when we click a thing, it loads and then it also gives us the card, which is good. Alright, we did a good amount of stuff today. There's one last thing I want to do just for convenience, and it's that right now we're just rendering text for loading, and I want an actual loader component. Where I'm going to put it is in a directory called common, and this will just be loader.tsx. And for the loader, I just want the SVG of the logo, and this is the Apollo logo. So that'll be React components as logo. But there's a few CSS things that we want to add. So this will be common.module.css, and we can import the CSS like this. And first give it a class name before we define the styles. And it'll just be named loading, nothing special. But this is everything we need for the loader. So the loading class, we will need a height, and I decided with 8 rem for the size of it. And the fill color is going to be D8, D9, E0. There we go. It's this gray color. Now I also want a animation, so I'm going to make a keyframe here, and it's going to spin indefinitely. So we only need a 2 property in the spin keyframe, and it will spin 360 degrees. And then finally we need to apply this spin keyframe, and I only want it to be applied to the path property or the path tag inside the SVG. So it will be using the spin animation for 1 second, linearly, and infinitely. And I also want the transform origin to be in the center so it doesn't move or it doesn't spin on its axis, because that would look not great. And then lastly, let's add a index file to export everything from /loader. And now we can apply the loader into all of the pages that we have. So let me just close all these files. And we want it inside of both index and launch. So in index, we'll remove this. We'll add our loader and make sure that it's coming from components common, which it is. And then in our ID page, we need to change it from this ternary to be loader. This is kind of long. I wish it would just wrap, but this is fine, I guess. And now we can see the loading animation. So let's go here, and we should see it on a refresh. And there it is. So the spin animation is only on the outside. The A itself stays still, which has a nice look to it. And we can also go on to an individual page and see it for a split second. Alright, cool. So we accomplished launches, or the very first part of launches. It'll get a little bit more complicated, but I want to save that for the next video. In any case, I hope you enjoyed this video, found it valuable. If you did, please subscribe. If not, that's cool too. And I'll see you all next time.